Welcome to Beyond the Game. I'm Illyanna, and today I'm joined by my amazing co-hosts, Jill, Ty, and Shelton. How is everyone doing today?
Hey guys, super excited for today's episode. I think it's such a big topic in today's world.
Yeah, for sure. The way media covers sports has a massive impact and is something athletes really have to deal with firsthand.
Absolutely, absolutely, Ty. Whether it's a game, it's attendance, the public perception, or even how we perform, media plays a big role in it all, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So today we are going to be discussing different news outlets and how they impact not only attendance at sporting events, but also how they shape the way the public perceives athletes and teams as a whole. And later we are going to be joined by our special guest, Reagan Turner, and she is responsible for sending newsletters to parents of Clemson football players and keeping them updated on everything that's happening within the team. And we're really excited to hear her insights. All right, so let's start by talking about how different types of media influence sports. Jill, what kinds of news outlets do you think have the biggest impact on how people view teams and players?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mix of more traditional for like since the age range is all over the place. Definitely older people like more of the traditional sports media like ESPN. And then I would say more the younger crowd is more of like newer platforms like social media. Especially with like X, Instagram, and TikTok, the news just spreads so fast and sometimes it's not even accurate. So it's kind of hard to believe though, based on these social media platforms. But Ty, as an athlete, how do you feel when you see headlines about Clemson's football or baseball teams?
Yeah, it really depends. When it's kind of positive coverage, it can really bring a lot of hype and energy to a team, which is great. But when it pushes like a negative narrative, like it can be really tough for a team to like get energy and gain energy when they think like no one's really behind them. And it's tough sometimes, but it can really go both ways. Shelton, what about you?
I mean, yeah, I agree with you. We try to block it out when it comes to things like that, but everyone around you, whether it's fans, family, even you have professors and classmates and like that come to the game. So talking about like what they saw on ESPN or Twitter, it's kind of hard to ignore it because at the end of the day, you feel some way about it. So if media paints a player in a bad light, it can stick with them for a long time, even if it wasn't true. And I don't think nobody want that. So I most definitely agree with you.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think on the fan side, the media definitely has a big role in whether people show up to games. And I think if a team has a losing streak, the media might make it seem like there's no hope and it can definitely hurt attendance.
Yeah, exactly. And on the flip side, I think a lot of the hype in media can make a game feel like a must-watch event. Ty, do you think the crowd energy is like different when there's a ton of media versus not a ton of media coverage leading up to a game?
Um, yeah, absolutely. The game gets a lot of hype. You can feel the energy like before the game or like the series. And then when it gets time to the game, you can definitely feel it in the stadium. The fans are louder and it honestly fuels us as players.
Exactly. But if there's been a lot of negative to the press, the atmosphere can feel a little off sometimes. And whether it's a basketball game, football game, I think everybody can kind of feel that atmosphere. Like when the tension is in the air. So it's crazy how much media can influence that. But at the end of the day, I think that's something that comes with the sport.
Yeah, and in y'all's opinion, how do you think that media coverage differs between the male and female athletes?
I think there's definitely a little bit of a difference. I feel like female athlete sports aren't as well known as males, if that makes sense. And I feel like they often just get like less coverage overall. And when they do, the focus is kind of sometimes more in their appearance or like personal life rather than their actual performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when women's sports get attention, it's usually on like the bigger stages, like the Olympics or the World Cup. Meanwhile, while male athletes get coverage year round.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of hard too because women's sports are more so not on like the more well-known platforms like ESPN and stuff like that. So I think that's probably why too. But do you guys think that social media has given athletes more control over their own narratives, or has it made things harder?
I kind of think it's like on both sides. On one hand, you got athletes that can speak directly to the fans, and also like clear up all the rumors with themselves. Because most people don't want that on their name. On the other hand, on the other hand, one bad post can spread fast and hurt their reputation, and that's when it comes to playing a role in your NIL and just how people perceive you when they see you. And I don't think that's a thing nobody will want, athlete or not.
Yeah, some athletes have built entire brands off of social media, and if they slip up, the backlash can be intense. Um, how does the media's portrayal of underdog teams impact their performance and fan support?
I would say I think people love a good underdog story, and definitely when the media hypes it up or like a Cinderella team, I think it can bring in tons of new fans and really build up that performance overall.
Yeah, but like if the media paints a team as having no chance, it kind of can hurt their confidence or how they're treated by the rest and by the public and fans.
Okay. Have y'all ever seen a media story about a team or a player that has completely changed the public perception overnight?
Yeah, I remember when a player was painted as a villain after one bad decision, even though they were a team leader before that, that one decision really kind of portrayed their future and like the team as from a fan perspective.
Yeah, or like when a team gets hyped up as the next big thing, but then struggles under that pressure. Like, for instance, when Clemson played Duke in basketball, it was very hyped up that Duke was the number 2 seed and they were coming to play the underdogs. And I think that that's also where like the fan pressure kind of came in and playing
Right.
Clemson's home team, it definitely put them under a lot of pressure, which caused them to lose.
Yeah. Also, do you guys think that there should be any regulations that are put in place on how the media reports on more amateur athletes?
Yeah, I definitely think there should be. College athletes are still young, and I think they're handling a lot, like going from high school to just in general transitioning to college. And sometimes the media kind of forgets that when they go after them.
Yeah, exactly what Jill said. It's one thing to critique a game, but it's also another when you're critiquing a 19 through 21, 22-year-old kid. And some of the articles that are put out feel personal and that can really affect a player's mental health.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with both of those points. Do you guys, on top of that, think that the media plays a bigger role in shaping fan perception more compared to national media?
Definitely. Local media covers the team kind of year round, so their narratives can be more detailed and personal, and fans tend to trust them more because they have a deeper knowledge of the team's history and dynamics.
Yeah, local media can be huge for a team. It can shape how the community feels about the team. They're consistently praise certain players or criticize coaching decisions. It spreads quickly among fans and sometimes even affects how we're treated in public.
National media, on the other hand, kind of tends to focus on the big picture of the storyline. They might highlight a major win or scandal, but local media is more involved in the day to day, which has come out like somebody get hurt or something happen within the team, which can have a bigger impact on the long term perception of what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads to like how do media narratives affect individual players versus entire teams?
For individual players, the media can make or break your reputation. A single highlight reel can turn someone into a star overnight. If it gets into the right hands, like on Twitter, and it blows up, it can be really big for somebody. But also on another side, one bad moment can make it a target for criticism for weeks.
And I think for the teams, the media usually builds a general storyline, calling the team underrated or overhyped. I think sometimes they can hurt a team because they go on over their expectation. And like if they call the underdog, they kind of can go in with a different mindset. That label kind of sticks with the fans, and they start to see the team through the lenses, whether it's true or not. So they, like I said, they put that expectation on that team or the player and saying what they is or what they ain't. And it's like kind of hard when it's on you because you want to meet that expectation.
Yeah, and going off what Ty and Shelton said, I think that sometimes when one player gets singled out, whether it's positive or negative, it can definitely change the overall team dynamics. And, if the media blames one certain player for a loss, they might feel more pressure than before. And I think if they, on the opposite side, overly praise someone, it can also create tension among teammates because one person is getting put more in the spotlight, than the rest of their team.
Yeah. Do you think college athletes feel more pressure from media coverage than professional athletes?
Looking from the outside in, I definitely think so. Like I said earlier, college athletes are juggling schoolwork, keeping up with their grades, making friends, staying on schedule, and all that. But because professional athletes are used to it and they have media training, college athletes are still just learning how to handle public exposure, while, like I said, also just juggling all of that in their personal lives.
Yeah, like to answer your question, Ty, in college, most of us don't have a PR team to help us navigate through tough situations. If a pro football player make a mistake, their agent or publicist, whoever that helps them can clean it up. College athletes are often on their own, and some people grow up different than others, so they go with how they think to handle a situation, and it might not be best for that situation or the team. So, almost everything. So,
Yeah, and even going on top of that, I think another thing is that a lot of college athletes are much more accessible to, fans and classmates. And even I feel like a lot of times during class, professors might bring up certain media stories and daily interactions, which can definitely add to more pressure, I think, for those college athletes.
all right. With all that being said, do you guys think media coverage ever influence how a team strategizes before a game?
Yeah, absolutely. If the media is hyping up a certain matchup, teams might adjust their game plan to focus on shutting down that star player the media is talking about.
Yeah, also if the media like expose the team's weaknesses, the coaching staff might work extra hard to address it. If everyone's saying like this team struggles with defense or this team struggles with offense, I think you better believe that the coaches are drilling that in their practices.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes even coaches might use the negative media coverage as more of a motivation. So I think that a lot of data analysis are doubting a team. They'll really use that to fire up those players. And then, kind of going on top of all of this, how do you guys think that media representation of injuries can impact a player's confidence?
I think it can be tough. I kind of went through something like that, and media just kind of put it out, and but you trying to come back from that mentally. So if the media keeps talking about the injury, and it makes me feel a certain way, and you're trying not to get defined by it, but you do a little bit, and even if they're ready to move past it, it's kind of still out in the media, or you get people texting you, "Are you okay? Are you still hurt?" When you probably 100%, and they keep bringing it up. So I think so. It can be tough.
Yeah, and sometimes, the media can exaggerate, like severity of that injury, making fans question if the player will ever return to full strength, which can then affect the player, like, oh, am I really going to be able to come back from this? And, it can really be frustrating for a player.
Yeah, and on the flip side, if like the media downplays an injury, I think fans might expect a player to return too soon, and that just puts pressure on them to rush recovery and perform better than they think they can. So, do you guys think that media reports ever exaggerate rivalries to create more hype?
Yes, they highlight one or two trash talking moments and make it seem like there's bad blood between teams, even if the players actually respect each other.
I think sometimes it helps because it get the fans excited, it get them all routed up and ready to go. It can also be annoying when the media creates a rivalry with players that don't even be seen as a big deal coming into a game.
Yeah, I would say I think it might depend on the sport because I think some rivalries are more genuine, while I think others are definitely overhyped for, views and ticket sales.
Yeah. How has the rise of sports podcasts changed the way fans consume media?
I think podcasts have kind of helped this because it just like lets fans hear longer, more in-depth discussions rather than just like short news clips on TikTok or X that like who even knows if it's true. And like Shelton even said when he was injured and somebody blasted it, like you don't know the full story of that. And it also just like gives athletes and analysts a chance to explain things in their own words.
Yeah, it also helps them feel more personal. Fans feel like they are getting inside information when they listen to athletes talk directly instead of hearing about it through like a trend, like hearing about it on social media. Like if a fan was to come to me or I put it out on social media when I had an incident or when I got hurt, I think all the he say and she say wouldn't have been that much of a talk and everybody would have knew the real. So I just think that it makes them feel more personal and feel like they're more in tune on what's going on.
Yeah, I would say I think that podcasts can also challenge those mainstream narratives. So I think that if the media spins a story one way, athletes can go on a podcast and then be able to set the record straight.
So with all that being said, can misleading headlines ever cause tension between players or coaches?
For sure. If a headline suggests, or gets out that a player is unhappy with their role and doesn't trust the coaching staff or the team, there definitely will be tension within that team. And like, you never want that within a team. You don't want somebody that's not happy there or that just doesn't want to be there at all, because it can cause a team to slowly go down and it can cause unnecessary drama, even if it's not true.
Yeah, and like if a coach sees something in the media before hearing it from a player, it can cause a bunch of damaged trust, and like even if the player never actually said what was reported.
Yeah, and I think that coaches and players have to communicate well in order to make sure that the media narratives don't create friction within the team. I think that's definitely really important. And I will say, with all of this, that does conclude our first segment in our podcast for today's episode. And we are so excited to now welcome Reagan Turner onto the podcast. All right, now we have Reagan Turner here on the podcast, and we are so excited to have her here today. Reagan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, like we want to start like a few basic questions with you. Like with me being on the football team, I know newsletters and things like that go out to the parents from the football team. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what exactly was your role in sending out the newsletters to the parents of the Clemson football players?
Yeah, of course. So I worked for the director of football academics and freshman transitions. And in that role, like Shelton said, I helped send out the family newsletter. And doing that, it was I designed the whole thing, created the whole thing pretty much from scratch. And it started at the beginning of the seasons, creating a template for home games, away games. And then even in the spring, we had a few newsletters go out just to update parents on what was going on before spring practice, spring game, just different things like that. But it was giving them information for games, a few highlights of the week, just different things to keep the parents updated, not only on things they needed to know throughout the week, but also just to kind of give them some highlights of what the players are doing.
That's awesome. So how did you kind of decide like what information goes into these newsletters?
Like I said, they kind of were structured in a way that they were sent out for games specifically, at least during season. So home games were pretty much always the same. You had your information for game day. This included everything from tailgating, where you could find player-parent tailgating spots, where their seats were, when they needed to put the people that are coming in to get their tickets. So players get an allotted number of tickets, and you have to have those in by a certain date. So it had that type of information in there, as well as a map of the whole stadium, and some information following the game as well, because we provided a space for parents of players to meet their player after the game. So that information pretty much stayed the same the whole week, or every game. And it was the same thing for away games. You just had a little bit more information that you had to put in, a little bit more specifics of this is where, if they're going to do Tiger Walk, they're going to do it at this lot next to the buses. If they're going to be in a certain section, because the sections change varying on stadiums, as well as their clear bag policies if they had one, and just different things like that. But along with that, we also had pages where they would have an honor roll for players. So after the first game, you had an honor roll of player stats, who got certain awards and accolades. So I had to fill out both of those pages for offense, defense, and special teams that'd be sent out to player parents, as well as a front page that would have some questions that we'd ask players just to kind of give them a little bit of fun to send something out to the parents. But also we did some highlights on some of our coaching staff, as well as our student workers within the building, just to kind of keep parents in the loop of some of the people working with their players as well.
Gotcha. I kind of got something to say about all the stuff that you just listed, like with being a football player and having a parent that get this information. I think it's a good thing on what y'all do and how y'all do it, because the parents, you don't want a lot of lost parents not knowing where to go, not knowing what time or what time anything starts. I just think that's a good way to kind of keep everything in order, like with any sport. So you don't have a lot of lost parents and they just keeping up with their sons and things of that nature. Because game day could be crazy at some point. So I think that map and et cetera, sending it out to the parents just to keep them updated on everything that's going. Because changes can be made depending on if the game got pushed back or whatever may happen. So I think that's cool that y'all do that in that way.
Yeah, and I think
And
it keeps like
especially, oh, God.
I think it keeps a lot of like pressure off the football players too, from like they're preparing for the big game and they can't be answering their parents hundreds of questions. So that's definitely a good way to keep information clear.
And especially like y'all said, like with times and everything, especially at Clemson with having Tiger Walk, you want to know when Tiger Walk's starting, because it changes varying on game time, playing time. But we also kind of try to give those heads up as far in advance as we possibly can so that they do know. And like you said, parent or players can't really talk to their parents right before games, and they want to be left like kept in the loop. They don't want to be left out of it, especially because it's their kids playing. So that was a really big part, making sure times are down to the minute, even if it is like a 8:37 instead of just a normal 8:30 kickoff that it would say on a news channel.
Gotcha. Have you ever had a parent express concerns over like negative media coverage?
I don't think there's necessarily expressed concerns about it, but especially with some of the newer players that when they have um, media coverage that they weren't necessarily expecting, they do express kind of how do they handle it, because you have those older players that have came through and they've kind of learned how to deal with it. They've also grown up and now they're not 18-year-olds coming straight into college, straight out of high school. But you do have parents sometimes ask like, okay, how would you deal with this? But it's also a big community along with the player parents that they are constantly communicating with one another, supporting one another. So I don't think it's as much of us getting concerns about it as much as just kind of asking how to navigate it as their sons start playing.
Yeah, awesome. And would you say that the newsletters help to almost counteract those negative narratives that are going on occasionally in the media?
I would say yes, because especially in the newsletters, we want to include as much positive information as possible. So you have this honor roll list that you send out for games so that those are all the highlights of the game. There could have been something that had went wrong, but obviously that's not included in it. But also when they have those weekly awards and accolades that get highlighted overall in like the conference, we also want to highlight those. So there could be some negative attention being drawn from the media, but our newsletter is strictly the positives that kind of came from it and highlights those type of things rather than the negative things that can come from media.
Cool. So when you say like newsletters, and you also talk about like you're talking about how you send them information for the upcoming game, but then also highlights from the game. So you saying that you send two newsletters out, like one before and one after, and also like how are you sending these out? Like are they on email? Are they in the mail?
So they're on email and they're a PDF. Typically, they're all together. So the layout would typically be like the front page would have your kickoff time, where the game's going to be, Tiger Walk times. But then you kind of get into the more fun information on that page of like, this is our Tiger Talk. This is a spotlight of a student worker. So and so had an award this week. And then you kind of go more into your honors and accolades, and then you get to your game day information. So it's all compiled into one, but it is updated every week, and they're sent out by Thursday morning. So even though they're sent out Thursday morning, they have information for both the current game that's going on, and that's like, again, the stadium that you're going to, those type of things, but it's information for the next week's game, for tickets and when those kind of deadlines are as well.
Cool.
So with that, I know it's a lot going on. It's a lot of stuff like that's going on with parents and even the players, because like you said, new players come in, they can get lost with information and things like that. What would you think is the biggest challenge of giving parents the information during the season? Because like you said, it's different games, different times. There's a lot of stuff going on that goes into just sending it out. I know it's helpful, but on y'all end, it could be a little hard. So like, what's the balance?
It can be hard, especially I feel like home games are pretty easy just because You know when Tiger Walk's going to be based on the time of the kickoff because those typically don't change. You also don't really have to change much about this is where your tailgate spot is. A lot of that can be kind of copy and pasted. But when it does come to information for away games, getting that all in the same week, but coordinating with your director of ops to make sure that you have that information correct, but also coordinating with other people and doing like the highlights with players, meeting the players throughout the week. But that can also be really difficult because, like Shelton would know, they're super busy and you have to find time when they're free. Because that's kind of how like their schedule is just so busy. So finding those times where you can meet with specific players to ask them questions, but also making sure the information is correct because it is getting sent out. And doing all that in a week's time can be a lot, and it's just time management pretty much.
I did have another question for you. How do you get in contact with the other teams or stadiums for those away games?
So that is typically through our director of operations. They typically get like a whole pamphlet of this is where the players are going to go. This is the hotel they're going to. This is when they come in on Friday when they do their walkthrough. They get all that information in a big packet. And then I go and I find them and I ask for the specific information that I may need for that week. That way I don't have to get the whole breakdown of what they're doing for every minute for the weekend. But also, like the stadiums, finding those is pretty much just going onto their athletic websites as well as their bag policies. So some of it is just from their website and can find it on the internet, but some of it is also going to the director of operations in Clemson so that we can get those details straight.
That's a lot because football players, we just think our parents just show up and know where to go, but it's a whole system behind that helps everyone out. And I know it's a lot of information that parents can't get, but really the players might tell them. But on you guys end, how do you balance giving updates while keeping certain information private? Because I know that all information doesn't need to go to the parents, and some of it do need to stay within the team. So how do you balance that?
It's kind of a known standard per se. So like the same thing, like I talked about the honor roll earlier. Obviously, we're going to send out all the good things about the players because this is going to every player parent. So you don't want to send something specific about one player that's particularly not great and the whole player parents see it. So that's one thing is just making sure it's positive, but also going through the information that you send out on a game day. There are specific compliance rules. So we let them know, obviously, you can't do this, this, and this because of compliance, but they don't necessarily need to know the reason behind it. And it's also one of those things, if you give too much information, it can be very overwhelming and it can be hard to read through. So we try to keep it as short and concise as possible so that it's easy for the parents to kind of look through and pick through everything. And it's a very general thing so that it is for all player parents. And if a player wants to go tell their parent a specific thing for that weekend, I want to meet on the L after the field to meet you on the field because we don't provide a space on the field, then that's up to the player. But we provide inclusive overarching areas for parents, and it is for the whole of player parents and not just singular parents.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, why did you pick this job, and what is your favorite highlight from working there?
So I grew up in kind of like a coaching football family. My dad was a head coach. My brother played in high school and actually ended up playing at Clemson and now is a coach there. So I had kind of always been around sports, knew I wanted to work in sports in some way. So I actually originally ended up in Tiger Pride my first year working with football, and that's in the recruiting area. So I kind of got to see some neat things about the transition from high school into college. That was pretty neat. And then after that, it's kind of like I wanted to experience a little bit more. I was kind of getting more into my degree of communication. And so I decided that I wanted to go do this role and got to do the newsletter and a few different things, just like events that I got to help with. And probably, I think creating the newsletter was probably one of my most favorite parts, but I think it's also so neat to see how much goes on within the building and not even just like what's going on at the football facility, but like Shelton said earlier, like the players know they had this, this, and this, but sometimes you don't see everything that's going on behind that. And to see like the smallest of roles have the biggest of impact on the whole complex and the whole organization is pretty neat. And to have a small little part of that, I thought was just a complete honor and privilege to be able to do during my college experience.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Reagan, for being here. Definitely enjoyed learning everything that you had to say. And thank you so much.
Thanks,
Reagan.
Reagan.
Thank y'all for having me. Of course.
All right, no.
That was a great conversation that we had as the four of us today, but also with Reagan. So huge shout out to her. We covered a lot today, from the media's influence on public perception to how it even affects families of athletes.
Yeah, and a huge shout out to Reagan for giving us behind the scenes look at how communications works within a team, especially a big program like Clemson Football.
Absolutely. I appreciate her for coming on and giving us that insight. Even like being a player, I know my mom shows up to every game and on time, and just to see the effort that they put in to bring that information. So if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us on YouTube at Sports News Media Podcast, and also check out our Instagram if you can.
And thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Game. We'll be back for the next episode with more great content. So see you next time.